Welcome home to Homespun, a weekly internet gathering of family, friends, and businesses from Platte County. Our purpose is to connect our community and showcase the colorful threads that run through our tapestry. Grab a warm cup of hometown goodness, sit back, put your feet up, and visit with us a while. I'm your host, Mark DeLapp, and I bring to you portions of interviews from some of our own. Welcome home, Platte County, to Homespun. Well, today on Homespun, we are here at the Wandering Hermit, correct?
Correct.
And I want you to introduce yourself as the owner of the Wandering Hermit to everyone that's watching by television.
Sure. My name is Dan Brecht. My son Zach and I started the Wandering Hermit Books and Gifts about 6 years ago, so that's pretty good. I'm pretty much a lifelong resident of Wheatland and Platte County, and have tried living other places, and you know, that rubber band theory just brought me back. So here I am, and we're running a bookstore, and now, as of last fall, a toy store that we added on next door, and we're pretty excited about that.
Where did you add the toy store? Now, I know on one side you've got Blackburn's Emporium.
We own that building, but that
Right.
is Mitch's. That
Right.
is Mitch's business, and
Sure.
so he rents from us. The Toy Store is to the east of us, next door. When we bought that building, we knew there was already an existing doorway between the two stores, because at one time there was a men's clothing store on this side and a women's clothing store on the other side, and they were connected.
Well, I'll be done.
So we bought it knowing that that was a potential thing that we could do.
Sure. And so are you actually calling it a Toy Story over there, or?
It is part of the Wandering Hermit Books and Gifts,
Yes.
but we call it the Toy Store.
Toy Store.
It's becoming more and more the Toy Store
Okay.
as time goes on. Yes.
I thought you were making a play on the movie A Toy Story because of the books and everything, but I don't know. Feel free to use that.
Yeah, the toy. There might be a copyright infringement issues there. We'll try to avoid that. Although it really does roll off your mouth as Toy Story, doesn't it?
It does.
But
It does.
We'll try not to say that.
Okay. Well, Dan, you grew up in Wheatland.
Yes.
Were you born here in Wheatland?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And what did your parents do, and where did they come from?
My parents, my father Harry was actually born in Chicago before the Depression. His father lost his job during the peak of the Depression. They moved out here because his grandparents lived here and farmed. So they moved out here, and that's how they got here. My mother was born here on a farm west of town, and then grew up on a ranch even further west on the Albany County, Platte County border. So.
And your dad was from Chicago.
He was actually, I think, Evanston. Actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
one of the suburbs of Chicago on the north side.
Sure. The Evanston Aces, I think, is what they were called from their college down there. And but I grew up a little bit north of there in Milwaukee, so.
Oh yeah.
We had a lot of relatives down there, and I had an uncle that worked for American Airlines down there, and so yeah, it was one of those places I worked for a little while too, but. Came to Wheatland because I thought if I had to put another 4.5 hours in a traffic jam in Chicago, I was gonna just absolutely scream.
You know, I remember coming through Chicago from south to north, coming back from a vacation, and 8 lanes probably of traffic going both directions, and it took us about 3 hours to get from one end to the other, going at about 5-6 miles an hour. It was awful. It was when I decided I never wanted to live in a city, and I really began at that point to appreciate living in rural areas of Wyoming. So.
Well, I'll tell you, I lived in both Los Angeles and Chicago, and I'd take Los Angeles traffic over Chicago traffic.
Yeah.
They've got the 8 traffic lanes you're fortunate you had all 8 traffic lanes open. Most of the time it's only 6 out of the 8 on a good day because of the road construction that goes on 24 hours a day down there. And then you get the crazies who drive 80 miles an hour. And I've seen them, Dan, reading books as they're driving 80 miles an hour. Now, I know you're a bookstore owner, but I'm sure you wouldn't advocate that.
Still don't want people doing that.
Not
No, that's
behind
not
the
a
wheel.
plan.
But, you know, that's why they have...
As bad as texting.
Right. That's why they have audiobooks.
Right.
They haven't come into that realm yet. So, but anyway, okay. So your mom was she primarily from this area up here then?
Yeah, she was born here and lived pretty much her entire life here.
Okay.
After my dad retired and mom retired as well, they spent a little bit of time out in the Las Vegas area in the winters for a few winters, and then I think they grew tired of that and moved back to Wheatland full time again.
Sure.
But
And
yeah, so she was, entire life basically spent in the Wheatland area.
And what did they do, Dan, for a living here?
So my dad did a little of everything. He sold cars, he was a janitor, he had his own business multiple times, he worked in gas stations, you name it, my dad did it. Mom was pretty much a stay-at-home mom until my younger brother started school, and then she got a job and worked at the local Pomida store for quite a few years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they were pretty much business people their whole lives.
Pretty much,
And,
yeah.
and obviously by looking around at your store and the idea that they brought you up with a work ethic and an entrepreneurship that you have. So where did you graduate from high school? Here?
Right here in Wheatland. Yeah.
Okay. And what did you do after high school, Dan?
Went right immediately to the University of Wyoming. 4 years, graduated with a degree in education.
Okay.
And then came back to Wheatland first year. Taught school at Libby Elementary for a few years. At some point moved over to West when they opened that school in 77 or whenever it was. Took a break from that during the power plant construction days when it was just pretty hectic in the school district and everywhere because there were so many people coming and going, and you'd check in new kids and lose kids every week pretty much.
Sure.
And I moved up to Alaska and taught between Alaska and Albany County School District number 1 to the west of here. 4 or 5 years, and then wound up coming, I guess 5-6 years, then wound up coming back to Wheatland and teaching some more. Before then another hiatus back up into the rural schools in Albany County to the
Sure.
west of here. So.
Tell me about Alaska. And how did you end up going to Alaska? That's one of those dream places that it's always been a dream to go visit there and to get out to the Kenai Peninsula and the Kodiak Island and the bears. And so
Sure.
Tell me a little bit about Alaska.
Well, and that's exactly how I viewed it. It was a dream come true. I helped some friends. He was from Wheatland. She is from Alaska originally, and they were living on the family farm here in Wheatland and decided to move to Alaska. So I loaded up my pickup, and they loaded up their pickup, and we, were essentially moving vans, and we moved them lock, stock, and barrel up to Eagle River, Alaska. That would have been in about 1976, I think, about 1976. On the way back, on the way up, I happened to pull into a small little community called Palmer, which is in the Matanuska Valley. If you've ever seen the large cabbages that they grow, Palmer is where most of that is done. It's a real agricultural area, and which sounds like an oxymoron, but it really is. It's just a wonderful place.
Is the climate conducive to that up there, or
It is.
what is the growing season up there?
The growing season is short, but it's 24 hours a day. So when
That's right.
when it lacks in number of days, it makes up for in length of daylight.
And intensity in the daylight, correct?
So they're able to grow cool weather crops really well. It's hard to grow tomatoes and corn, but it's really easy to grow potatoes and broccoli and those kinds of things.
Sure.
So a lot of small farms that do exactly that.
That's great.
I pulled into this little community of Palmer, fell in love with it right away, and thought, if I ever moved up to Alaska, this would be a place I'd like to go. About 2 years later, I was brushing my teeth one morning, looked in the mirror, and said, I think I'm going to move to Alaska. I mean, that's literally how it was. I think I'm going to move to Alaska. So I started applying, got an interview, and went up to Alaska, interviewed, got a job, came back to Wheatland, loaded up my stuff, and drove up the Alaska Highway to Palmer and started teaching.
Highway 2?
I don't know what the number is.
The main highway.
The Alaska Highway.
The Alaskan
which they
Highway.
used to call the Alcan. They
Sure.
don't call it that anymore much, but yeah.
My only question to you in that whole story is, what kind of toothpaste were you using?
I have no idea. But I won't use it anymore, because I'm pretty much settled here now.
Settled here. Okay. You put the Alaska toothpaste away.
I did.
Okay. And when you got to Alaska, did you know anybody up there?
No. No, but it's funny because there were a couple of teachers and other educational personnel teaching in working for the school where I taught that were from Wyoming. One was from Sheridan, and I don't know where the other one was from, but so there were actually quite a few Wyoming license plates that you'd see on occasion. I guess 3 years I was up there.
Sure.
So,
How does the climate differ from here to Palmer?
Palmer is almost on the coast. It's just off the Cook Inlet. So it is moderated by the ocean currents. So it doesn't get the roller coaster effect that we get here, where it can be really hot and then really cold and really hot and really cold. It doesn't get that, but winters are quite a bit longer. They last quite a bit longer. It's really dark in the wintertime. It only gets light in Palmer for a couple of hours during the day. I taught at a school for two of those years where we didn't see the sun because it was behind the mountains to the south of the school. So we didn't see the sun for about 2 months.
Wow.
The sky would be light for a couple of hours, and then of course the further north you go, the more extreme that is.
Sure. Is that hard to get used to, something like that, where you're...
Well, it wasn't then because I was really active in doing outdoor stuff. So,
Sure.
Ice skating and cross-country skiing and hiking and doing all kinds of stuff, which is why I went up there. So it wasn't a problem. And then I taught in a school that was well lit, so the problem with cabin fever didn't hit me. And cabin fever is a real thing for a lot of people. They
Sure.
they suffer from depression, from the darkness, from the lack of daylight.
Right. I remember living in eastern Michigan, right off the lake shore, and we used to get the lake effect almost every day.
Oh.
And there's a lot of depressed people up in that area because you just don't see the sun. You drive 30 miles now inland, and you get bright sunshine, but
Right.
you hit that line of lake effect, and you get that almost every day.
Yeah.
So I've seen that firsthand with people just absolutely depressed and absolutely getting that cabin fever, a lot of alcoholism, a lot of addiction there.
Sure.
But you're kind of an adventurer, Dan. You kind of, you're not really afraid to go out and be the adventurer. What when you were growing up, what was it, Howdy Doody that inspired you, or?
I think I'm ADD, ADHD, whatever.
Yeah.
I think that I just don't sit well.
Yeah.
So I just want to be doing things, and
Sure.
so that worked out pretty well.
Right. And I bet you were kind of in heaven for a while up there with the wildlife and
Yeah,
the
it was
skiing
great.
and
It really was.
Yeah, it was-
a wonderful experience, but a point came when I decided that I missed my family, and even though you have friend families up there that become really close to you and
Yeah.
you hang out with all the time, it was just time to come home. I had a grandfather who was aging, and I knew I wouldn't have much time to spend, even if I moved back right away. So it was just time to move back.
Sure.
And spend time with family.
And you said you were up there, what, 4 or 5 years?
3 years.
3 years up
Yeah.
up in Alaska.
Yeah.
And then get back down here and then tried to adjust again. And you came back to Wheatland.
Actually, there was a few years that I taught 2 different times in the rural schools, one-room schools up in rural Albany County. The second time I was up there, I took my son Zach with me, and he went through grades 3, 4, 5, and 6 in one-room schools up there.
Wow.
So it was interesting. He says that was probably the best time of his life, actually.
You learn a lot
Yeah,
through
you
that.
learn a lot.
Exactly. I had
Self-reliance is one of those things you learn. Really
yeah.
well.
I had taken a school one time. A church wanted me to accept a school, a Christian school, and so I did the same thing with the one-room schoolhouse idea, and the older kids got credit for teaching some of the younger kids, and the younger kids learned how to have heroes at an early age for some of the older kids, and so it worked out really well.
It does work out well.
And I remember we graduated 4 seniors that very first year, so it went off pretty well. But so after you're done teaching in the one-room schools, you came back to Wheatland?
Then came back to Wheatland and retired from teaching here in Wheatland, yeah.
Okay. And what did you teach primarily here, Dan?
Elementary. In the rural schools, I taught everything between kindergarten and 8th grade, and usually it was only 3 or 4 students. A couple of times I had more than that, but 4 is about an average number.
Sure.
In Wheatland, I taught mostly 4th, 5th, and 6th grades. In Alaska, I taught 4th and 6th grade. So pretty much elementary, upper elementary.
Sure.
Yeah.
And how did that teaching, everything we do in life trains us for our next steps, I believe. I believe that, in our next purpose, our next destiny, next part of our destiny, things that we've learned really will play in. How did that teaching lend to what you do here as a bookstore owner?
I will just say that my favorite department in the bookstore is the kids, the kids books department. So
Sure.
that's my main forte, and that's where I spend a good part of my time, is making sure that we have a good number of books there. And so then toys lent itself well, because I really think strongly about STEM toys, things that will help kids develop and have a thirst for learning. So I think it's had an effect.
Sure. I had my patriarchal grandparents were all about going to the Golden Agers Club and playing cards and learning how to play canasta and pennies from heaven. But my matriarchal grandparents were kind of like your work ethic, in the fact that Grandma gave us games to play, but they always had learning attached to them, whether they were creating many words out of one big word, or different things. She had to always make sure that there was learning attached. She was the kind, she graduated from the University of Minnesota Duluth back in the 40s, and then went back to school in the 70s to get her Spanish degree. And I said, well, Grandma, why Spanish? You're 74 years old. And she goes, because you never know. And I never know what that was, but she was my hero. She got up and she had that work ethic. And at teaching, I would write her letters from college, and she would circle the misspellings and send the letters back to me. That's just the way she was. Always the teacher. So you've got a good book section here. The start of this bookstore, Dan. Tell me a little bit about that. How did it come about?
My son was working in Cheyenne at a job. It was okay, but he didn't care for it all that much. I had just retired a couple of years prior and was getting bored with life. He had spent some time working in high school at the library here in Wheatland. He had also worked at Barnes & Noble in Cheyenne. So, it came up a lot. We'd visit about things, and we just decided maybe we had the skills and the talent that you needed to have to start a bookstore, and so we did. We didn't really know how this whole thing was going to pan out at all.
Sure. And when you opened it, what year was that?
So it was almost 6 years ago, 2014.
Oh, okay. So it's relatively a new business.
Relatively new. Yeah.
And yet it's such a pillar here in the community. When I first came here, everybody was like, "You've got to go to the Wandering Hermit. You've got to meet Dan." Being the fact that you've kind of got your hands into a lot of different things, the Downtown Development Committee, the Economic Development Committee, things like this. Tell me a little bit about some of those other endeavors that you're involved in here.
Well, there are several of us who have been a part of, it's Platte County Main Street. It's part of the both state and national Main Street program, which focuses on downtowns all over the country. I suppose the emphasis may be a little more in bigger towns and cities than it is smaller towns and cities, but they embrace having good, successful, prosperous downtowns everywhere. So we started many, probably 10, 11 years ago, becoming a part of that Main Street program. And so we are a countywide, Platte County Main Street, countywide Main Street program, as is the Chamber, as is Economic Development. And there are certainly challenges to trying to coordinate 5 communities and their downtowns and make things work. So there's a lot we could be doing better, but we still feel like we're learning how to do that. The emphasis kind of is in Wheatland because most of us in the Main Street program are from Wheatland, but we really work hard to coordinate things with Glendo and Chugwater and Guernsey and Hartville as well. In addition to the Main Street program, we've also been working on becoming a historic downtown district. We're getting close. It currently is at the state level for approval. Letters have been sent out to sort of test the waters to see if everybody is okay with our proposal, and so far it looks really positive. Then once that's approved at the state level, it will go to the national level for final approval, and hopefully, maybe by next year early we'll be designated as a historic district, downtown district.
How did that come about? Whose idea was that?
Well, I would say that's probably Linda Fabian's idea. Linda is a real shaker and mover in our community, and I hope someday you get to spend some time and interview Linda. She is, she and her husband Joe started and operated Dance Wyoming Studios for years. She is secretary for the State Historic Society in Wyoming. She just does a lot of stuff, and she worked for state government for quite a while. And I think credit goes to her for getting things rolling on this historic district.
Sure.
Pretty much.
And why would we be what's special about Wheatland that we would be part of the historic district?
Well, one of the key things is the buildings, for the most part, in an historic district have to be 50 years old or older. There has to be some kind of reason why the district is there. And in our case, the reason would be, people came here to farm because this was developed as an irrigation area, irrigated farmland. And when that was done, people would come in from all over the country, mainly from the Midwest, to buy land pretty inexpensively that was being offered up and start small farms. And they would get off the railroad train, no highways back then, get off the railroad tracks and need a place to stay, need a place to eat. So this downtown district developed as a result of that. So it's, a lot of the buildings, at least from the railroad tracks up to 9th Street, are about 1900, between 1900 and 1910, just a lot of them. And even though there have been some, makeovers, that happens to everybody, there's still a lot of the original integrity still, especially on the interior of a lot of these buildings.
Sure, I just noticed the ceiling, the tin ceilings.
Original tin ceiling, absolutely.
Yeah. I see that a lot here. You can tell the turn of the century architecture in these buildings because of the huge crown molding that's in here.
Yes.
The tin ceilings in here, and the pumpkin plank floors in a lot of cases. It's amazing what some of the businesses have done downtown. You go over to Quintessentials and see what they did with that floor. It's absolutely amazing. It looks like it's the original. It looks like you're walking right into the early 1900s when you're over there.
And they spent days, and there was a lot of hard labor put into those floors at Quintessential.
Sure.
And kudos to them for working so hard to bring those floors back.
Sure.
That was really something.
Well, her and then Gina did the same thing down at Simply Creative with her floors, and it's near and dear to my heart to take some of the older buildings and repurpose them instead of tearing things down. Everybody was in that period for a long time there. You get to the 80s and the 90s, and even into the new millennium, where everybody wanted to tear things down. And I had taken the Gibson Mansion in Michigan. He was the head of Gibson Refrigeration for many years. They started with the ice boxes, and then they went to electricity. And in World War II, they were the only actually refrigeration company in the United States. There was nobody even close to them. So I had this mansion that was 5,400 square feet, brick Federalist on the outside, 5,400 square feet, and then 3,000 square feet on the carriage house. And the city wanted to come in and tear it down. And I thought, this can't happen.
Right.
And it took me 4 years, but I brought it back to pristine condition. I don't like to see things that are history. You know what I think it is, Danny? Going over to Europe really ministered to my heart. The idea that I was standing in an 800-year-old building, a 1,000-year-old building, and we can't do that here in America. And if we continue to tear our structures down, we won't. Our children won't know what that's like.
Right. That's absolutely right. You know, and I see a need for remodeling in some ways. Like windows are a hard thing to make a decision to stick with the old windows when new windows are so much more energy efficient. But you can also do a pretty tasteful job of replacing windows and putting in windows that look pretty much like period windows.
Exactly.
There are a lot of things you can do. Unfortunately, we all went through the 60s and 70s when remodeling was, especially exterior remodeling, really changed things a lot. And so those of us who are attempting to go back to more of what the buildings would have looked like originally, we're having a tough time. But on the toy store next door, for example, we uncovered the old transom leaded glass windows that are above the big plate glass windows that had been covered up for 40 or 50 years. We took out not one, but two drop ceilings. One had been put in probably in the 50s, another one probably in the 70s.
When
so
the fuel
all that
costs
came
started
out,
to
and
go
we found
down.
a pretty cool tin ceiling over there. It'd been pretty beat up, but you know, with a lot of work, we brought it back to the point where it looks pretty good. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's amazing how some of those things happen. But back in the 70s, of course, they had the energy boom and everything was so expensive. And so they were trying to save a lot of money because people were heating with $100 bills at that point.
Precisely.
On their boilers.
And I don't think people were as interested in living upstairs anymore. People wanted ranch homes in the ranch-style homes in the suburbs, probably.
Yeah.
I don't, or elevators.
Yeah.
You know, and these apartments downtown and in downtowns everywhere just weren't as attractive because they usually didn't have elevators. They would have stairs. Now there's a real desire to come back to downtowns and to make them your residential areas as well.
Sure.
So we've been pretty successful with that here.
Now, Dan, how big of a challenge is it for you? I mean, you never ran a bookstore before. Now you run a bookstore, and your son still run that with you? Zach
Yes.
still run this with you?
And he is absolutely taking over most of that work.
Sure.
I'm still mostly involved in ordering and pricing, that kind of stuff, and he pretty much runs the store in every other way.
Sure.
So, but I still am here 6 days a week, pretty much 10 hours a day, and have plenty to do. So.
Do you only sell used books, or do you sell?
No, this side is almost totally new books.
Okay.
And we have a pretty good nonfiction and a pretty good fiction section. We have a great children's section and a much improved young adult section. Then the used books, we have a section in the very, very back of the store for paperbacks, and in the toy store, in the back of the toy store, we have all of our hardcover fiction and used, and our hardcover and paperback nonfiction.
Sure.
We have a lot of that too.
Sure.
But the goal is to expand the toy store and gradually move the used books in the toy store to the further back.
Right.
Because we want it to be a toy store, not a used bookstore.
Now that's toy store. Are you including some of the old games and
Yes.
and things like that?
We have a
New and
lot
old?
of like retro kinds of toys.
Like Monopoly?
Yo-yos, hula hoops.
Okay.
Yeah, games like Monopoly and Twister and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Right. What was the one we used to play with, that had the metal and the erector sets?
Oh, the erector set. Now,
Yeah.
we haven't found a supplier for erector sets yet.
Okay.
But we have Legos. We have just a lot of those kinds of things.
Wow, that's incredible. We don't have anything like that within shouting distance from Wheatland at all.
Yeah, you'd have to go to Cheyenne.
So you're pretty exclusive on that, which is really brings another entity here. Let me ask you a little bit about your name, the Wandering Hermit. Does that describe you?
That describes Zach and me. I'm kind of the wanderer. He's kind of the hermit. And I'm more becoming the hermit than I used to be, but it kind of fits us. And actually, he came up with the name. And I had a different name, and so we threw both names out to people who would come around to check on our progress as we were getting ready, thinking about opening a store. And I don't know what people were thinking, but they liked his name better than mine, so it became
The Wandering
it became
Hermit.
the Wandering Hermit.
Well, I think it's perfect.
It is. It is
For your spirit of wandering and adventure.
Yeah.
And I have not met Zach, but he seems like one of those that's really grounded and really into the business of things. And
He sees this as his future, which
Yes.
is wonderful. I mean, he really does. It's his right now, kind of his purpose. He has
Sure.
a daughter and he has a bookstore. And
That's
they're-
awesome.
They're both, his purpose in life, which
Sure.
is wonderful. Yeah.
Well, Dan, it's been wonderful talking to you today and getting to know a little bit about you and the bookstore. And again, your address here is
875 Gilchrist.
875 Gilchrist,
Wheatland, Wyoming. Yep.
Wheatland, Wyoming.
Yes.
Soon to be historical Wheatland, Wyoming.
Soon to be, we're hoping.
All
Yes.
right. Well, thank you, Dan,
Thank
so
you.
much for spending some time with us today and